advice right.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Crabb, beautifully on time. Catherine McKinnell, Petitions Committee.
Thank you, Chair. Prime Minister, the childcare system is in crisis. Would you agree?
I'm not. No, I don't think I would. I think that actually announcements in the budget were warmly welcomed by the childcare sector for what they're going to do, which is to increase the funding for childcare as it is now, but also expand the provision to cover some of the gaps in the existing system and move us into an internationally, I think, quite generous position relative to our peers on childcare. And it's a really important area. It's something that the Chancellor, I think, addressed very comprehensively in the budget.
So, I mean, I think parents currently spending 30% of their household income, often more than their mortgage, on childcare would say it is currently in crisis, and they're the parents that can access childcare. There are many that can't. Can you explain, given there is a crisis, I think, for many households, why someone with a 2-year-old today will not benefit from any of the additional funding ever?
So, just let's be clear. So, it is clear that we have, relative to other countries, more expensive childcare. We've taken steps to address that. Actually, one of the tweaks that was made and changes is on the ratios, and that will help ensure that there's actually potential for more competitively provided childcare, bringing us in line with other peers. And then, in terms of the rollout of the extra provision that the Chancellor announced, I think there's a couple of things. One is that there's going to be a very rapid increase in the funding rate for the existing programmes, a very significant increase, and that's happening relatively quickly. And the reason it takes time to roll out the very substantive increase in provision is because it takes time to recruit more childminders, and it's right that it's done and delivered properly, and that's what's taking time.
Yeah, so it's helpful that you've mentioned workforce challenges, because that is one of the big barriers to actually delivering anything that the government is currently promising. And you mentioned ratios. We know many concerns have been expressed that is going to significantly reduce quality. Many have raised safety concerns, particularly petitioners who lost their child very tragically at nursery and are very concerned about the ratios being reduced. But also, that is one of the only measures that the government has suggested to increase the workforce. The other one is childminders and increasing the number of childminders. Can you explain why the government's chosen to give a £600 bonus if you sign up as an individual, as a childminder, but if you go through one of the 6 private childcare agencies, that you get a £1,200 bonus, a double bonus? Can you explain the logic behind that?
Yeah, I mean, I think this has been designed in consultation with the sector to make sure that it's
with
effective.
6 childcare agencies.
I said, well, I think it's been designed with the sector. I'm happy to get back to you.
There are only 6 childcare agencies, and they're advertised on the government's website. What conversations have the government had with these agencies about these proposals?
I'll happily write back to you and the committee on exactly what conversations are had and the rationale for that.
The rationale, the use of taxpayers' money to give double bonuses to sign up with private agencies.
Well, I think it's a reflection of the fact that they're through intermediaries, so there are additional costs, and ultimately you just want to make sure the policy is effective in bringing additional people into the system. Because I think,
and there's nothing the Prime Minister wishes to declare in respect of that.
No, I mean all my disclosures are declared in the normal way. But I think, as you said, Catherine, the policy is we're keen to roll it out as quickly as practical. And one of the reasons that you can't do that overnight is because you need to improve the workforce. And these are policies that are targeted at improving the supply of childminders, so that we can increase provision of childcare, which is something that I think everyone wants to see. So I think it's an entirely reasonable thing to do. You talked about ratios. I mean, I think that, as far as I'm aware, I think they're just bringing the ratios in line with the ones in Scotland. I don't think it's that dramatic. And also, again, ultimately, it's just a ratio. No, it's the minimum. People don't have to. They don't have to use it, right? They can choose to do something different. Parents can make that choice, and that's something that people will be able to make their own views on. But I think in the same breath, if we're going to say, well, we've got childcare that's more expensive than we would like, and then we want to try and bring the cost of that childcare down, and one of the reasons for that is the ratio, that seems a reasonable thing to give people the choice of something different, and it's up to them if they want to use that.
I think most parents don't really have a choice about the ratios, that the childcare that they use. I think that's a choice for the sector. Most of the sector have said they do not want to reduce the ratios because they do not have the training in place and the qualifications in place to meet the same ratio requirements that we have in Scotland. So there are a lot of concerns about that. But I want to ask you about eligibility as well, because the proposals vastly grow eligibility for the free childcare hours. However, 4 out of 5 low-income families are completely locked out of the government's provision. Can you explain how that's going to help, well, low-income households, but also increase the workforce generally?
So they're not locked out. I mean, it's the same eligibility that we already have, which is to support working parents.
No, it's not. There's minimum earnings requirement. So households under £20,000 earnings don't
and that's
qualify.
right, because this is a policy to support people into work. And
but how do you get those people into work if you don't support them in childcare?
So I've just gone through. So this policy, as the OBR have actually said, which they've never done before for a policy like this, I think they have is the single biggest contributor to the increase in the workforce that they've modelled, which is I think 110,000 from memory in aggregate. The single largest contributor to that was this policy. So I think actually our independent, the independent OBR have said that it will help improve labour supply, and I think it said the eligibility is done in a similar way to the existing programme. I think separately though, it's important there are also changes made to the provision of childcare through universal credit, where people are not always aware that 85% of childcare costs are reimbursed through universal credit, and the big call from people, obviously that particularly helps those on lower incomes, the big call from people was to change how that system works. So instead of that childcare payment reimbursement happening in arrears, it could happen in advance. There was also some requests to change the caps that were applied in that, and the Chancellor's budget dealt with both of those things, so that those payments can now be done or will be done in advance. The caps have been raised, and again, all these policies are warmly welcomed by the childcare sector, by other parent groups as well, and that's because they will improve the supply of childcare, make it more affordable, and as the OBR have said, lead to an increase in labour supply, which is why they were so warmly welcomed at the time they were announced.
So I think that any change is warmly welcomed, but there are huge concerns expressed about these current proposals, and you must be aware of them surely, that the ratios are going to reduce quality. There's a crisis in the workforce, with 30% thinking about leaving, and we've heard stories of going to work in McDonald's and Asda because they pay better. So increasing the number of children that each childcarer has to care for without putting in additional support for training is going to potentially have the opposite effect. And one of the missed opportunities, really big missed opportunities here, is to extend early years education to some of the poorest households. We also have a challenge with training. Why would you not allow a training nurse, for example, or a paramedic to access these free childcare hours?
I mean, lots in there. I think they're just really important, because I think it was missed in all of that. There's been a 30% increase in the funding rate for 2-year-olds, and that's going to kick in from September of this year. Now, that incremental money going in for the hourly rates will be used by providers to make sure that their teams are paid properly and to invest in whatever they want to.
Cover the costs.
And again, I think that was, as I said, it's a 30% increase. It was requested and warmly welcomed.
Prime Minister, a very big issue, childcare, on the petitions website. Finally, somebody's given me something to do in this committee, which has so far been very well behaved. We'll move on to small boats. Onto